Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Big Nickel IDP Podcast. I am your host, Jon Macri, fantasy analyst at PFF. Folks, we are getting so close to the start of the NFL season. It's officially August. We got the Hall of Fame game probably tonight for many of you by the time this episode drops, or it would have just passed for the rest of you tuning in a little later. But either way, fantasy draft season is well underway. I've been drafting my fragile little heart out already. I know a lot of you have as well. So naturally, we're going to turn our attention to 2023 fantasy drafts for these last few episodes of the offseason and talk our favorite sleepers and values for IDP. And just got a notification. I am on the clock. So let's get it. All right, here we go. Like I said at the top, and most of you are well aware, we are in the thick of fantasy draft season right now. So we'll talk about favorite values and sleepers to target in IDP drafts. And joining me to do so, just as he did last year, back to drop some of the best fantasy knowledge available from fantasypoints.com. He is the great Justin Varnes. Justin, how's it going, my friend?
John, it's going great, man. There's so much optimism this time of year. I can't wait for it to all come crashing down come week 2.
Yeah, this is really the optimism part of the year because all the hype videos and stuff like that coming out of camp, it's all positive news. Nobody's really getting any negative light shine in their way. We don't get to see any of the negative stuff. Only positivity gets the clicks. So, I mean, the injury stuff that's the one that really hurts. But yeah, it is nice to kind of just watch some camp videos and get used to watching football again.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell everybody a little bit of bad news. I am not in the best shape of my life coming into this preseason, unlike a lot of the people I've been reading about, but there's always next year.
That's true. Yeah. Every camp season, you got another chance to be in the best shape of your life. And that's what's important. So, but yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed doing this last year with you. And we talked about quite a few names, and I think we had some pretty good values and sleepers last year that we talked about. We'll do the same thing again this year. We're basically looking at players that are going a little bit later in fantasy drafts, guys that we've noticed kind of fall in when we're doing our drafts, what they're, whether it's ADP or just people not really paying attention to players that people aren't really thinking about, I guess, as they're doing their drafts. And there's some of them are bigger names here, but there's definitely quite a few that are going to be off people's radar. So we'll get into that stuff here right now, and I'll let you kick it off with one of your names at the top of the list here. Who was your first value for this season?
Well, a lot of what I tried to do when I was putting this list together was find people who would be possible, top 12, top 15 guys that might be a little bit lower on other people's draft boards. And then also some deeper guys that we can get later in our drafts or maybe even, last round or waiver wire. So, but I'm going to start kind of on the higher end of the list. And I want to talk about Cameron Curl. I've seen him, I think, in my opinion, he's been a little too low on some draft boards. Remember, he got injured last year. He only played 12 games. He got 83 tackles over those 12 games. If we, stretch that out over to a 17 game season, that's going to be 116 tackles. That's going to be fourth in DB tackles. So, and that's also last year, Washington played some of the fewest snaps in the league. They played under 1,000 snaps on defense. I'm not expecting a huge turnaround, but they got really unlucky with a couple of their games. So give my man another, 30 or 40 snaps, which is basically another, half, or maybe even, honestly, they could go all the way up to about another 50 or 75 snaps and give him a full season. We could be looking at 110 to 120 tackles. And I think he's somebody that you can get a little bit later if you're looking for a DB1.
Yeah, I like that. And honestly, He's probably not going later if I'm in drafts. I'm very high on Cameron Curl. I think I
Yes,
have him as my safety 3
yes, same here.
heading into this year, right? So I love Cameron Curl. I know another guest on this podcast, Jake Colhagen, loves Cameron Curl as well. And yeah, for all the reason that you said, he's a tackle machine. And 51% of his snaps were in the box last year, which was the 6th best rate among safeties who played at least 150 snaps on the season. Posted a really strong tackle efficiency, 11.8% as well. Even posted 2.7 tackles over expected on the year, which may not seem like a lot, but when taking into account that high-end box deployment, still coming out on top in that regard is a big positive. And it's something that he really came through on. Even the year prior, he was plus 15.4 thanks to nearly a full season of games played. So like you said, he did miss 5 games last season. So I think, yeah, Cameron Curl is going to be great this year with talk about Jamin Davis getting potential jail time for reckless driving as well. There could be even more box opportunities for Curl, especially considering, somebody like Cody Barton probably shouldn't be an every down player. Uh, maybe they bring somebody else in, or Rashaan Evans or whoever as a free agent if something does happen with Jamin Davis. But I think either way, Curl is still ready to smash this year for IDP.
Who do you have up next for DB?
So for me, I went with Julian Blackmon of the Indianapolis Colts. So this one really, I'm not a player that I would typically be in on in previous years, but word out of camp right now is that Julian Blackmon has switched safety roles, moving from the free safety position to the strong safety position in Gus Bradley's defense, which for most NFL defenses wouldn't be like a significant change, but with Bradley deploying one of the highest rates in the league in single high coverages, I think it's very much noteworthy, especially for IDP. Blackmon has only averaged about 9% of his snaps in the box over the last 2 seasons, but now he figures to see a pretty big increase in that regard, which should be huge for his fantasy production. This is a guy that's never posted more than 50 tackles in a season, but even with just average efficiency, assuming that deployment is right, I think he could come close to probably doubling that on a full year's worth of snaps. So we just saw Rodney McLeod take over that role early in the year last year. He finished with a career high 96 tackles from an 11-year vet. So we saw this last year again, that box snaps absolutely matter when it comes to tackle efficiency for the safety position, as that deployment yielded a 10.8% tackle efficiency on the year, which was a point and a half higher than even the overall average safety tackle efficiency. So I'm definitely buying into this offseason change for Blackmon, a player who has never really been much of an IDP contributor. I think I'd expect that to change this year if that move does happen. How about you? What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I love Gus Bradley. I can't believe he's still running so much single eye safety, but
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, we've seen Dan Quinn, who ran a lot of it, and all these people kind of coming out of the Seattle tree. Quinn's completely revamped his style and revitalized his career as a defensive coordinator, leaving that behind. Even we're seeing Pete Carroll has changed his defensive philosophy, got some, a lot more multiple over there. They're doing a lot of different things, but Gus Bradley is sticking to his guns, man, which is great for us because, we missed that heyday where it's like, all right, who is our single high box guy? Great. I'll just take any one of these guys and we're going to be okay. Well, those days are basically over except for in Indianapolis. And I totally agree. And we see this every year. The secondary is so easy to switch around. I mean, every single year we see safeties and cornerbacks who show up to camp the following year within a completely different role. Remember that. I remember this with, Budda Baker was killing it in Arizona. Then all of a sudden we looked up and they had basically moved Jalen Thompson into that Budda Baker role. It threw everybody off. And this is a clear signal that something like this might happen again. They've got they got Rodney Thomas there, who I think might be playing some free safety. They're messing around with that. But actually, man, this leads me right into one of mine. And this is a super deep cut, even though he's only a sophomore, which is, I mean, this guy's got a ton of volatility. And one of the things that's nice about a Cameron Curl, that we were just talking about is the floor for a player like that is fairly high, and
Mhm.
when you're going for a DB1, that's what you want. There's so much volatility in the DB market. You have anyone with a fairly high floor is very valuable, and whoever plays this strong safety role will have that high floor. But Cross was, he was a rookie last year. He's coming into his second year. He was supposed to be that role last year. He didn't make it out. He basically was struggling a little bit in training camp, and then basically lost his starting job almost immediately. It threw a whole bunch of our draft strategies right out the window. But word out of camp, and I got some of this from listening to a Gus Bradley interview. He had talked about how Nick had made a bunch of improvement this year. They asked him what specifically was he doing wrong last year, and they said that Gus straight up just said during walkthroughs he wasn't retaining what we were talking about. He wasn't focused, whatever that was, some sort of like lack of really kind of being there, maybe just overwhelmed. But he said that Nick's doing a lot better this year. So there is an outside chance that they're going to put Nick Cross into this position. So if I'm drafting today, I'm not taking him as even my DB3. I just want him as like a last round dart throw because nobody else is buying him. But when preseason starts, that's certainly something I'm going to be watching. But whether it'll either be Blackmon or Cross, we think. So whichever of the two of those kind of comes out on top, I'm happy to invest fairly heavily in, particularly if I can get him for a DB2 or DB3, which I think neither of these guys are going very high right now.
Oh yeah, no, they're definitely not. Nick Cross, I haven't even seen him really being drafted in the deepest of drafts. Julian Blackmon, you look at the IDP show ADP that they're doing for best ball, he's like safety 69 or something like that. So super late, these guys. So definitely worth the shot. You put Nick Cross on the list. I started getting like kind of flashbacks to last year because I was all in on Cross too. Just being like, I thought he was going to be a steal for IDP. He had a decent preseason, like the games at least, but yeah, he lost that job so quickly. I don't know, maybe he had a short leash, like you said, because of some of the training camp issues and things like that. But this could be a fun one to watch. I know if you're right, I know a few of my deeper dynasty leagues will be very happy about this. The ones that have had a hard time letting go this offseason. So
I understand it's tough.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Cross. I think it would be nice to see him. He's got that elite speed too. If they could get him on the field and get his head right, that would be at least a nice redeeming factor for him after last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I hate to derail this podcast. I'm about to run it really right off the rails here. But while we're talking about DBs and I have you on the podcast, I'm on your podcast and I'm just going to ask you for questions. Okay. What are we doing with Marte Mapu? What are we doing with this guy?
I know this is an interesting one, right? He's got a lot of buzz right now in camp because of New England kind of using him everywhere. And you know what? It kind of makes sense, right? He kind of did a little bit of everything in the FCS last season, right? There's not a lot of tape on the guy, but you look at, we did grade a little bit of his college, and he did do a little bit of everything. I think they drafted him as a linebacker, but he played more safety in college. I think that's what it was. Either that or it was the other way flip. But Belichick's moving him around all over the place. This is a typical Belichick thing, right? He uses these guys that play non-positional defense, right? Kyle Duggar is a safety. They put him at linebacker. They do the same thing with Adrian Phillips and guys like that. So I think Mapu could be potentially interesting in deeper leagues, at least for this year, until we see kind of how it plays out. I don't know if I'm drafting him necessarily, just because I think it probably is probably going to be more sub package stuff with him, especially with the Patriots. They're not going to give an every down role to a rookie right out the gate either. So I think he could be interesting. I think he could be a lot of fun, and if the deployments are right, he could be an interesting IDP. And I mean, Kyle Duggar's, I think, on the last year of his contract as well. So maybe there's a spot for him to take over the Duggar role if he leaves.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the safeties there have been somewhat fantasy relevant. The linebackers, usually aren't. We're not talking usually about them in the top 25 as it is. But I when I was doing dynasty rankings, I had to put them in both categories. I didn't know what to do with them. I was like, I can't leave them out of either category because I literally don't know how this is all going to shake out. So I should know if you had any insight there on whether you were leaning him, thinking of him as a Because yeah, I mean, he is. I mean, he's the classic kind of non-positional player, and which makes all the sense in the world in Belichick's defense. But we're so used to seeing a safety work more as a linebacker. If he ends up getting linebacker designation, I really don't know what to do with him.
Yeah, that definitely becomes a little trickier. And yeah, even Jawan Bentley, like I don't think he'll play an every down role, even though they gave him a contract again. Like he plays like 70 to 80% of the snaps each week. And look, I mean, what's his name? Devin McCourty retired as well, right? So he was their
Yeah.
deep safety. I think there's a chance that Kyle Duggar backfills a little bit of that deep safety role when he's not playing in the box, and maybe that's what opens up a spot for somebody like Mapu to come in and play those sub package roles closer to the line of scrimmage when Duggar has to play deep or something like that. It's the Patriots. I try not to figure out what's going on with them because we're almost always wrong, and they change it so often. So, but it'll be an interesting one to follow for sure this preseason.
Yeah. All right. Sorry to derail. Let's get back on the train here. Who do you got for defensive line?
Yeah, no problem. So I went with Arden Key, edge defender for the Tennessee Titans. So Key, to me, just looking at him, watching him these past couple seasons, he's been a quietly effective pass rusher over the past 2 years in both San Francisco and Jacksonville. He posted 80 total pressures and 11 sacks, in addition to a 78.3 pass rush grade on 583 pass rush snaps over the last 2 seasons. So now he joins his third team in as many seasons with a shot to play a decent snap share on a Tennessee defensive line, I think, that is in need of edge talent. And that's where the biggest key for me comes. The Titans, you know, you look at what they did in the draft, they didn't really do anything. They had just 6 picks in the draft. They lost Harold Landry to a torn ACL the year before that. They relied on guys like Rashad Weaver for 600 defensive snaps. They appear pretty content to roll with the group they currently have, which is, you know, it's not the biggest names. Harold Landry should be healthy, but I think Arden Key has a real chance to play a significant role opposite of Harold Landry, and guys like Danico Autry as well. So I think, you know, I think Autry too has a tendency to kind of play inside those stand-up edge defenders on passing down, so these guys don't really have to cancel each other out or anything like that. But Key, for me, he does typically project as more of a pass rush specialist, but he did prove that he could be an asset in the run game last season as well. He posted the best run defense grade of his career, which was a 74.2, which was on his largest snap share of run snaps since his rookie season. So I think it's a great spot for Arden Key to produce in Tennessee, work on a little bit on early downs and those key passing downs as well, and really just be a low cost flyer with enough upside to be worth a roster spot in those like medium to deep IDP leagues.
Yeah, I love everything you're saying. I think some of the key points for me are you talked about his snap count, right? This guy hasn't played above 50% snaps since his rookie year. So I definitely think he'll play more snaps this year. He's been more like a 200, 300 snap guy. If he can climb up into that 500 or 600 snap guy, you know, we could be talking anywhere from 6 to 8 sacks, and although, you know, and possibly more, but once we kind of move above 5 and get between 5 and 10, then as a DL2 or a DL3 or an edge 2 or an edge 3, Arden Key's the kind of guy who, you know, like we've kind of been talking, some of these guys are just not getting drafted or getting drafted really late. And once you kind of have your first, your main defensive end or your main edge, and you start getting toward the middle or late ends of the drafts, Arden Key is usually still there. And this is be one of those guys who start showing up every week in the statistics, and people didn't see it coming. So great, you know, late round flyer. I also love that he's playing on. I mean, I think Tennessee has a pretty strong pass rush there. I mean, there's not like that one main guy on the edge that like really stands out, but across the board, and I love them playing with Jeffrey Simmons in the middle, like being able to kind of hold up so much in the middle, occupy so many offensive linemen. That's really going to help Key. And I love just the fact that he should get more playing time, and it feels like he's been in the league for a long time, but I think he's only like 26 or 27. He's still got plenty of tread on his tire. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the opportunity should be there for him this year in Tennessee. We've seen these guys rely on their edge rushers pretty heavily, so I think there will be an opportunity there. So somebody to keep in mind, and another guy to keep in mind. Who did you have as your second name to watch on the edge?
Well, a couple of years ago, Romeo Okwara was tearing up the league. He had 10 sacks, and he was really looking good on that Detroit line. And then he tore his Achilles. Only played a couple of games before tearing his Achilles 2 years ago. And then he came back last year, played a few games, didn't quite look like himself. The key point here is Achilles injuries usually take a full 2 years until you can feel like you're back, even at 80% of what you were before. So this is another late round flyer, and if he's healthy, if he's back to feeling remotely like he was before, I think he's going to have a lot more value than some people realize. He'll also, if he ends up playing a decent number of snaps, now he's going to be playing across from Aiden Hutchinson, which should allow him a little more free range over there, not be double teamed as much. So he's a guy that, again, toward the end of drafts, I'm going to probably grab him and just look. If he ends up blowing up and kind of getting back to where he was before, even again, if he's like a 7 or 8 or 9 sack guy, I'm okay with that. If he's getting heavy snaps and having at least some decent tackle floor. But if not, I'm spending a late round pick on him. I can replace that fairly easy. What I can't replace is the upside he brings. And for my DL3, and once we get into these deeper leagues, that's the kind of guy I'm going for. I want the guy that has, a legitimate shot at some top 12 upside.
Yeah, I love that call. I mean, this is exactly what you would want from like a late round guy to kind of step in and have that potential to be, a top 24, top 20, top 15 edge for IDP. I'd love to see a bounce back from him. He was so good in 2020. Like you said, he posted that 10 sack season, had a career high 84.5 pass rush grade, posted 61 pressures as well. I mean, he was just awesome. Unfortunately, the Achilles thing really killed him, because even in 2021, early in the year, that momentum from 2020 was starting to carry over through those first 3 games, first 3 healthy games. He had posted 16 pressures and a sack in there before he got hurt in week 4. And it took until, like you said, week 14 of last year, I think it was, to see him kind of come back. And he needed 2 separate surgeries on his Achilles as well. So I'm definitely not judging the 120 snaps or whatever it was from him last year, because it's going to be really hard to get back into a rhythm after something like that. So we saw, kind of how little he played when he was active. It just wasn't enough to do any real damage, even though he did get 2 sacks in one game, but it was against Zach Wilson. So maybe not putting too much stock into that one. But if he can get back to that 2020, 2021 form, I'd be very excited, because he was really, really good. So I really like this call, and definitely somebody that people aren't paying attention to, because everybody's excited about James Houston, right? Because he posted 8 sacks on that small sample size last year. So Romeo Okwara definitely getting looked over. So let's we talked about Okwara coming off a Achilles injury. Let's go on to another player who was coming off an Achilles injury last season. Unreal transition there, if we're being honest. Carl Lawson. Carl Lawson of the New York Jets. He's not like super high for me. He's edge 37, but if you look at some of the IDP show ADP, he's going as edge 61. To me, I think this is crazy. I think it kind of speaks to how under the radar he is right now. But I also believe this is the first mention of Carl Lawson on this podcast all offseason. So outside of maybe a passing mention of him when we're talking about Will McDonald or something like that. But this is, I think, the first feature for him, which surprises me, because I do love me some Carl Lawson and always happy to talk about him. But anyways, he's coming off the best sack year of his career since he was a rookie. after missing all of 2021 with that Achilles injury. So really nice bounce back right away for him after what can be a pretty devastating injury, like you said. So this was his first year even playing a regular season snap for the Jets as well, and he still earned a pretty strong 72.8 pass rush grade. Didn't really have the pressure rate or win rate that he's been known for, but again, just 1 year removed from that Achilles injury definitely plays a part in that. He also had one of the better, meaning lower rates of his pressures being classified as cleanup or unblocked pressures at just 26.5%, which was a top 10 mark for the position. And his win rate and pressure rate, they were still above average, I should say, for the position, which when you include those 7 sacks, I'd say is pretty nice. It's a pretty nice season for a guy coming off an Achilles. But I do think, he gets some of that burst back in 2023, which should help him deliver more consistently as a pass rusher. But the biggest concern is going to be playing time. We know the Jets like to rotate their edges quite a bit, and they did spend a first round pick on Will McDonald this year in the draft after also spending a first round pick on Jermaine Johnson in the 2021 draft. So there's a shit ton of competition there, including a very good, very capable John Franklin Myers, not to mention Bryce Huff and Michael Clemens. So competition for snaps is fierce. There's no doubt about that. But all of that being said, drafters are well aware of this at this point, and it's one of the biggest reasons that he goes undrafted or unnoticed for a lot of drafts. If you look at again that IDP show ADP, edge 61 is pretty late, so people are already fading him. And among edges going in that range, you'd be hard pressed to find a better bet than Lawson to kind of greatly outperform that ADP. It's I think very similarly to like a Romeo Okwara as well. So. Yeah. Even with that rotation last year, he still led all the Jets players in pass rush snaps, and he was second among the team's edges in run defense snaps. So I still think he'll have the opportunity in 2023 as these young guys like McDonald and Johnson continue to kind of acclimate to the NFL and are worked in sparingly this season.
Yeah, and the other thing I like about Carl Lawson is that although you're right, they do rotate a lot on the edge. They keep everybody fresh. I know I've talked about it before, and I'm sure you have too. You don't have to play 1,000 snaps as a pass rusher to still be very effective for fantasy. There are a lot of players who, if they tried to play them 1,000 snaps, they would wear out so easily. So it's not necessarily the end of the world. Let's look at Philly last year. Philly rotated heavily on the edges, and they had plenty of sacks. I mean, that wasn't an issue for that team. And the other thing I like about that, although they are rotating, Saleh does not blitz much. He blitzes at one of the lowest rates of the league, which basically means he's allowing that deep defensive line to eat and no trickery. Just hop off for a couple of snaps, rest your legs, and then get back out there. And I think Carl Lawson could take advantage, especially at DL 61. This is the same thing we've been talking about with these other guys. Like if it's at the, if you already have if you play 2 or 3 DLs or edges, if you already have your first and second ones and you're feeling good about it, if I have a third one that I'm going to pick up, it's going to be one of these 3. To me, and of the 3 we've talked about so far, I'm going to start with, like, on my little list will be Carl Lawson above Okwara and Key, just because, and think about how well he did last year on that Achilles. Everything we said about Okwara is here too. This is year 2 from that. So he should be stronger. He should feel more confident. I think that's I love that he's going so late. That's the kind of guy you want, all that upside.
Yeah, there's just so much value there and so much potential from a guy that we've seen be like a very high-end pass rusher, right? So I'm pretty excited to grab him that late every single time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's talk about an interior defensive lineman that you put on the list here. Who do you want to talk about out of Atlanta?
Yeah, well, we're again trying to mix up some late round flyers and some players that might just be a little undervalued, but can be play a premium position. And for me, that's going to be Grady Jarrett. I think Grady Jarrett, I'm not going to get too much on a tangent here for Aaron Donald, but I'll talk about Aaron Donald for a second and the same thing. When you've got a defensive interior guy that has zero help around him, then you're telling opposing offensive coordinators, all right, Just throw everybody you got at their one good interior defender, and we'll deal with the trash on the edge. We'll just chip them and leave it tight end. And so, Grady Jarrett had to fight through a lot. He did not have much help last year. He had guys like Timmy Horn and Abdullah Anderson. And if you just said who, exactly. Taquan Graham, I think, played okay, but he got injured about halfway through the season, so he didn't even have Taquan Graham there. They didn't have much of a pass rush. Well, this year they went out and got Calais Campbell. I know he's banged up right now. He's going to miss the first few weeks, but even at age 78 or however old he is at this point, I think he had a great season last year, and he's a big guy who's going to help soak up some bodies. You also have David Onyemata there, who I think is a solid player. So in general, I think the defensive talent around Jarrett has definitely improved, and that's going to help. But also, he got a little unlucky. I had him down for 45 pressures, but he only had 6 sacks. He's probably a couple of short on that in terms of the league average. So now he's got a deeper, more talented line. Hopefully gets a little bit better luck. I also like who they have as defensive coordinator, Ryan Nielsen. This is a guy who gets a lot out of his defensive line. When he was with the Saints, they were top 10 in sacks every year he was there. So I like him to climb over that 8 sack margin here in 2023, and particularly if you have if your league differentiates between defensive interior and edge, I love him as one of my back end DT1s or DI1s.
Yeah, I love it. This is a guy the last few years now has been completely undervalued, right? Because he's so effective and still a volume monster at 30 years of age, 4 straight seasons of 800 plus defensive snaps. He hasn't played fewer than 700 defensive snaps since his rookie season. And he's just consistently underrated when it comes to defensive linemen in the NFL. He's kind of like the Cameron Jordan of interior defenders to me.
Yes.
He's a guy that plays every down, and he's just uber consistent week in and week out at least 50 tackles as well in each of the last 7 seasons. So just very, very consistent from Grady Jarrett. I had him as a bounce back candidate heading into last season when he managed just 1 sack in 2021. He delivered okay with 6 sacks in 2022. If we're going to put it over under on maybe 5.5 sacks for Jarrett in 2023, do you like the over there?
Yeah, definitely like the over there.
Yeah, I like it too. Yeah, the defensive line, like you said, has gotten better. They've done a better job at adding players to this that could potentially do some damage. I mean, Bud Dupree, hasn't been great in the NFL, but it's another name that they brought in. They drafted Zach Harrison out of Ohio State in the 2nd round, I believe it was. So just bringing in more players to kind of help him out, because like you said, this is a guy that's just been on an island by himself for way too long.
All right, shall we move on to linebackers?
Let's go to linebackers. Yeah, so I'll start with the guy Kyzir White with the Arizona Cardinals. We touched on this early in the offseason, but it seems that offseason kind of scuttlebutt, I guess, on Zaven Collins switching to edge and Isaiah Simmons practicing exclusively with the DBs is looking to be a lot more than noise under new head coach Jonathan Gannon. So by all accounts, Zaven is going to be considered an edge in this new Arizona defense, a position that is much more valuable to them and much more of a need for them as well as far as real NFL goes. But I'm a little bit hesitant to get too excited about Zaven Collins, at least in year 1 of that role. So Collins, for me, likely a kind of do not draft player. I'm okay missing out on him. I don't think he'll get double-digit sacks or anything like that where it would hurt me to pass on him. He's much more likely, just causing me to miss out on a much more stable IDP in those middle rounds of drafts. As for Isaiah Simmons, he was playing deep safety this past week in camp with Budda Baker rotating down and Jalen Thompson in the slot. This is not something I love for Simmons either. Obviously, we just talked about the importance of those box snaps. And if he's going to be the primary deep guy, I'm not all that interested in him either. That leaves Kyzir White as the primary linebacker wearing the green dot as well. which makes sense, I think, given his familiarity with a lot of Gannon's defensive scheme coming over from Philly together. He's coming off a bit of a down year last year, but actually came off the field a lot more than people realized. Played only 76% of the defensive snaps, so finished with just 110 total tackles after hitting 144 the year before with the Chargers when he played 84% of snaps. So I like Kyzir White. I'm calling him Mr. White, aka Kaisenberg. Sorry, I'm rewatching Breaking Bad. But he's my preferred target right now among the Cardinals IDPs, or at least among him, Simmons and Collins, and he costs a lot less right now, going way later than those guys when looking at the ADP as well. So Kyzir White definitely should be considered a value at this point.
Yeah, Mr. White.
Oh, nice. That was really good.
I love the fact that he obviously knows Gannon's defense, and with as talented as the Eagles were last year, it was a little hard to get everybody out on the field. I don't think they have nearly the amount of talent in terms of just being an interior linebacker, an off-ball linebacker, that they do in Arizona. So he knows the defense. I don't really see anybody there. I do believe, I'm with you on Zaven Collins. I do believe he's going to play off-ball linebacker some. I doubt he's going to be exclusively an edge. I think everybody's trying to find the next Micah Parsons, which is obviously very hard to do, but hey, listen, you got to give it a shot. Yeah. So I think he is going to sit there in the middle of that defense. And this is another year where I'm expecting Arizona's defense to play a lot of snaps. Again, another player who's going a little later than he should, or a lot later than he should. This is the kind of guy that, could easily end up, he's in the top 10 in tackles before people realize it. Definitely not taking him as my LB1, but I'm actually super happy to take him as an LB2. And if I miss the linebacker run and I end up with Kyzir White as my LB1, I'm actually perfectly okay with it. I think he has a really high floor sitting in the middle of this Gannon defense.
Yeah, he should be perfectly fine. Again, we talk about this all the time, but opportunity being the biggest thing. And the nice thing really with him, the reason he's on this list, he's not going anywhere near those top 24 linebackers drafted, right? So you could get him as LB3, LB4 sometimes, and it's beautiful. It's just like, it's perfect depth to add to your roster when you're doing your drafts right now. So definitely take advantage of that one. But let's talk about another linebacker here. So this was a guy we actually kind of touched on a little bit last episode as well. But what do you think about Jerome Baker with the Miami Dolphins?
Well, he's been one of my he's the guy every year that I tell everybody, you got to calm down. Baker is not going to get anywhere near that many tackles. And I always say it's not for a lack of talent. The way he is used, Miami has basically created their own version of Bill Belichick's defense over the last several years with Brian Flores and Patrick Graham. And as we know from New England's linebackers, they're just not used in the traditional linebacker tackle soaking role. And so Jerome Baker is always lower on my list than I'll see out there when it comes to draft time. But this year is the other way around. They've got a new defensive coordinator in Vic Fangio, who is I don't know how many podcasts I went on last year preseason yelling this guy's name. But sure enough, his defense is certainly starting to spread around the NFL. Everybody's like, I don't know what's happening to the scoring. All these pundits on TV. I'm like, I'm raising my hand, and nobody can see me at home. I'm like, I know what happened. So Fangio, he's got a different defensive scheme that's really been working lately. But the important thing for Baker is that Fangio's linebackers tend to, and we don't know exactly what he's going to roll out here, right? He doesn't have just like a cookie cutter defense, but what they traditionally do is they are guys who soak up tackles. Over the last 10 years that Fangio has been a coach, either head coach or defensive coordinator, 7 of those years he's produced a top 24 linebacker, and in most of those years it was a top 12 linebacker. Now, when you go back 10 years ago, some of those linebackers were names like Navarro Bowman, right? But he produced some of those years for Roquan Smith, and he's done. When he was in Denver, he had AJ Johnson up there. So you don't have to be an elite talent to soak up a lot of tackles in his defense. So, and again, on the other side, New England's linebackers, they haven't finished. We haven't seen one finish in the top 50 in tackles since 2016. We've had 4 New England players finish in the top 50 in tackles, but all 4 of them were defensive backs. So, so to me, I think he's somebody that if you just look at what he's been doing the last couple of years, you're missing what's likely to be a bump from that. Like, he's been right around 100 tackles a season. I think he's got a chance to be up in that 125 or 135 range this year. So I really like his chances to just change of defense actually being a huge help for him. But I want to ask you, while I've got you here, there is another linebacker there, and David Long, right? He's coming over from Tennessee, and he's a pretty good player too. And this is a new defense, so he Fangio gets a little bit more say as to how he's going to align everyone here. Do you see David Long being a threat to Baker in terms of their roles?
So I the way that I'm approaching it right now is I do kind of have David Long ahead of Jerome Baker, just because I think when it comes to being like a typical off-ball linebacker, David Long has shown a little bit more. He's got a little bit more experience in that role. Although in Tennessee it was a little bit different of a defense as well. A lot of light boxes and things like that, where he was different than your typical linebacker looks, but I still have David Long a bit ahead just because I think he's probably slightly more talented player, but he's on the smaller side as well. Not that Jerome Baker's, huge or anything, but so the way that I'm looking at it, and I'm willing to pivot too, because I've never been a Jerome Baker guy, like for the reasons that you just laid out, right? Talking about the defensive scheme and everything that he's done in there. I've always kind of avoided him, but Drip talked about this last week as well, talking about him as a bounce back candidate. You kind of got me on board with him. You've got me on board with him here after hearing you talk about him too, because I do think that this new defensive scheme should be a help for him. And I think there could be room for both guys to potentially get some playing time and make an IDP impact. It's just a matter of, which one's going to be primary, which one's going to be secondary, which one's going to be, getting more blitz opportunities, and which one's going to be getting more tackle opportunities. So I think it makes sense that David Long is the one that gets maybe more tackle opportunities and Baker gets more blitzing, just based on the history. But again, it could go either way. I wouldn't be surprised to see it with Baker on top and Long as the secondary guy. So the way I'm approaching it now is Long, but I'm definitely willing to pivot there.
I think if I'm in a draft and I want a piece of that Fangio defense linebacker, what I might do is wait until one of them is gone. And then grab the other, because chances are I can get another round out of the draft, pick somebody else up and wait for the first one of those to drop, because I do think this is we should see a lot of 2 linebacker sets. And as we've seen, and it used to be the thing. You could grab either Carolina Panther linebacker and be fine. Obviously Luke Kuechly's the man, but Thomas Davis would easily rack up high LB2 numbers and nobody even would remember his name. That was the thing. And then now it's all, we see all this single linebacker stuff, and then you worry that there's only one guy out there to really grab, but I don't think that'll be the case here in Miami. So I do have Baker a little ahead of Long, but again, if I'm drafting and I'm grabbing them as like an LB3 or something, I'm going to wait for one of them to fall off, because I think I can get more value by getting the second of those 2 options. I don't think it'll both go in the same round.
Yeah, and I think that's the right way to approach it, right? Like we talk about this all the time with running backs in ambiguous situations. It's the same thing with linebackers too. If we don't know for sure, it's not really always worth it to kind of plant your flag on being the guy to take the first one out of that group and saying this is definitely going to be the guy. Better to let somebody else do it, pick up a more stable or valuable option earlier than that, and then grab the second guy a little bit later at a better cost and hope that he comes out. Because when it's this close and we don't know for sure, it's better to bet on the value than trying to plant a flag there. So I'm kind of doing that with the next guy, even talking about out of the Houston Texans, Denzel Perryman. So Perryman, for me, I really like Perryman this year. I have him as LB23, but you really don't even have to draft him that high in most leagues. I think, part of that is because of, like I said, some of that ambiguity with how the Texans will deploy their linebackers and which ones specifically will emerge as starters. And maybe it becomes more of a rotation since they don't really have like a clear top guy that you trust for all three downs. But that being said, I do think Perryman plays a bigger role. And given D'Amico Ryan's history of deploying two full-time linebackers, I think there's a good chance that Perryman will play in one of those starting spots. Obviously, not a guarantee that he does. I think the other favorite right now is Christian Harris, who was PFF's lowest graded linebacker last season, for what it's worth. But he's the guy that's going much earlier in drafts. From what I've seen, he's the one that people are wanting to try to get. Again, he's the younger name. He's coming off just a rookie season. He played pretty well as far as an IDP last year, but if Perryman gets on the field as either that primary or secondary role, I think he'll have the best shot to kind of lead this team in tackles. He's proven that he could be a very effective and efficient tackler these last few years, coming off a 15% tackle efficiency season last year. He had one of the best first contact rates in the league as well at 12.5%. He had a 2.4% tackle for loss plus no gain rate, also on the elite end. So even if he cedes some snaps to Harris, I think he can be the guy to outproduce him. So when you look at Harris's numbers last year, he was far less efficient and was actually below average in tackle efficiency, first contact rate, tackle for loss, plus no gain rate as well. So that could be a continuing issue here in 2023. And like you said, if we're betting on value, I'll take the guy that's going a little bit later, who I think has just as good, if not a better chance to emerge as the top IDP linebacker in that group.
Yeah, I mean, if you owned Jalen Pitre or Jonathan Owens last year, you really should send Christian Harris a gift basket because as terrible as those linebackers were in Houston, it really helped Jonathan. I mean, both those guys basically led the galaxy in DB tackles last year. So,
yeah.
And I'll say this, you mentioned Harris being so poorly graded. It is rare that we see somebody get a really poor PFF grade, a linebacker. I'll just speak specifically to linebackers. It's rare that somebody who gets graded that poorly ends up with the starting job or keeps a starting job. So, we'll even talk a little bit about Alex Anzalone, right? So it's all the rage to pick on Alex Anzalone, and I certainly have been one of them. But he was above, he was at least average or a little bit above average. He was noticeably better last year than he was the year before. And the same thing happened with not TJ Edwards, but TJ Edwards out of no, not TJ Edwards, I just blanked on him. Who's the guy who went from Philly to Denver? And he wasn't even supposed to start. And then he has like a 21%.
Oh, Singleton. Yeah.
Yes. we don't understand how he can keep tackling 42 players a game. It shouldn't be physically possible. So he was terrible. And then he actually got better. And most people didn't realize he actually got better and was staying on the field. So if Christian Harris doesn't make a noticeable turnaround, I don't see him knocking Perryman out of there. And remember that primary linebacker role, and again, this will speak to Alex Anzalone, there is a lot to that role besides just their ability to run sideline to sideline and tackle 12 people a game. There's a lot on their plate. We've seen lots of talented linebackers get the green dot and fold like a cheap tent under all of that extra weight. Perryman can clearly do that. He's shown that over his career, having a veteran there in the middle of the field. So sometimes I like to look at, or almost all the time, I like to look at, if I'm a coach, how do these guys all fit on the field? Not just look what their numbers and their snaps look like, but how does this all look? How does the Houston defense look? And it really is hard to imagine this defense functioning without a veteran like Perryman, right there in the middle. So I agree with you. I know their linebackers were a mess last year in a big rotation, but these are things you can take advantage of as a drafter. There's all this clouds of mystery about what's going to happen with their linebackers, because that's what happened last year. But this is that we're turning over a new leaf here in Houston. So I like him there.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the main things I'm looking at, right? Is that veteran presence, somebody with experience. I think that's one of the most important things as far as what coaches value is guys that have experience and can call the defense and make and get everybody lined up and everything like that. So I think Perryman, like you said, could be potentially in for a big role this season in Houston. So let's talk about one more linebacker here. Who's one of your other values here at out of Atlanta?
Well, this will speak a little bit to that Miami Dolphins thing. We're talking about having two linebackers, and all the rage right now is Troy Anderson, and I'm one of them. He's coming into his second year here. He's got a chance to kind of take over this defense, and I really hope that it happens for him in Atlanta. But I think people are sleeping on Caden Ellis, who I think actually is a pretty now he had for Caden Ellis, he had an amazing turnaround from 21 to 22. He had a great season last year, even in kind of limited duty. So I don't know if he's going to be able to repeat that, but he did play really well last year. But my biggest thing is, although I'm sure they probably want Troy Anderson to be the guy here, one of the most important parts here is that he's coming over to be part of this defense, right? So he's played this defense before, so he's going to be somebody who will know this defense fairly well, and to me that makes a huge difference. When you've got a Saints defensive coordinator here, and he brings his linebacker, just like we talked about with Jonathan Gannon, bringing a Philadelphia linebacker with him to say, all right, I need somebody here who knows all of my calls, who knows all these sorts of things. So I would not be surprised if Ellis plays. I don't know if he's going to wear the green dot or not, but I would not be surprised if he doesn't play plenty of at least 1,000 snaps, be on the field a ton, and be the kind of guy that is getting drafted way too late. I'd love to have him as my LB3.
Yeah, he's really interesting, right? And I think, like you said, the main thing being that he comes over with Ryan Nielsen, the defensive coordinator there, who was the co-defensive coordinator last season with the Saints, and that's where Ellis got his first opportunity to start, right? Pete Werner got hurt, Ellis stepped in, and he was a very effective IDP option off the waiver wire last year. He led all linebackers in sacks as well with 7. So I think he does play significant snaps again in 2023 alongside Troy Anderson as that team is kind of revamping its defense. I think these two guys can work together in that defense and still potentially be strong IDPs. And again, it's another one of those situations, right? Troy Anderson is going to be the one that's getting a lot of the looks because he's that second round rookie draft capital from the year before. Now he's stepping into, a starting role. He's got the strong RAS scores and all of that kind of stuff. And people might not be looking at Caden Ellis in drafts, and he has a lot of that familiarity with the defense, could potentially bring some of that pass rush upside to the table as well. So yeah, I still like Caden Ellis as well for this season. I think that's a good call. All right, let's do that's kind of all the main names that we're talking about. I think what I want to do is I want to do a couple quick hitters here because we're in training camp season. We're getting all these kind of reports, and there's camp battles and preseason games coming up that we'll have to kind of sort where these guys fall on the depth chart and everything like that. So just a few quick hitters here as we kind of close out, and I'll start with the Bills linebackers. So I mentioned this on Twitter last week or the week before. I can't even remember now, but heading into camp, that competition for the LB2 spot in Buffalo is still very much open. I know I threw out AJ Klein's name as a dark horse, but really more to point out that it's not just between Terrell Bernard or Dorian Williams. Like most of the IDP community seems to believe. Tyrell Dotson was also somebody that I had ranked ahead of Bernard and Williams earlier in the year, and he's still getting reps with the ones as well. Even Balin Spector is in there. So they're trying out all these possibilities here to see what fits. And there was even talk about them moving to more of a dime package and getting Taylor Rapp to play those sub package snaps next to Matt Milano in that linebacker role at time, which was something that they just haven't done in the past. But sometimes, personnel or in this case, the lack thereof could dictate otherwise. So I think it's just a competition to keep an eye on into the preseason. Nothing here is guaranteed the way that it stands right now, and we'll likely need more time to kind of suss this one out. So for now, I'd probably be avoiding kind of the non-Milanos in drafts right now, or at least, like we've been saying, kind of grab that last guy of the group that you think has a chance, because I think all of these guys, as camp goes on and through the preseason, are all going to get opportunities to start next to Milano to see which one they like the most.
Yeah, I'm the Taylor Rapp signing was it was the first thing I thought too. Like, all right, well, who's gonna play with Matt Milano? And when they signed, they love Minkah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. They also have DeMar Hamlin there. Obviously both Poyer and Minkah Hyde, they're over 30, but they have been they're a big reason why the Buffalo defense does what they do. They basically run the same 11 guys out there, or not the same 11, because they do rotate their defensive line a lot, but their linebackers and safeties and cornerbacks, I mean, it's almost a carbon copy every snap. And a lot of that has to do with their trust in their safeties. So Taylor Rapp could be somebody that moves up into that linebacker position. I could also see them doing something like, moving Minkah Hyde or Jordan Poyer up there, giving them less responsibility deep in terms of as their legs get a little more worn down. Either way, between Rapp being there and creating some possible three safety sets, and without a clear winner, at least for right now, if I'm drafting tonight, I can't take another Buffalo linebacker. The only thing I do want to say is that Terrell Bernard, I think he's my favorite to play that role, and AJ Klein would be another one. But these guys in general are better at the run than they are at the pass, and I would not be surprised to see that the linebacker two there be a 2-down linebacker, and then on I wouldn't be surprised if they don't change things this year and they run 3 safeties or do something to where that second linebacker spot is not somebody who will get 1,000 snaps this year.
Yeah, they could very well change to maybe like a situation specific package for that second linebacker spot, like we've seen a few teams already start to do in the NFL. I think that would make sense as well. Another linebacker group that I do want to talk about, and that's the Eagles linebacker core. So this one more to do with the Eagles LB2. This one was kind of interesting to me because I, like so many others, just kind of assumed that Nicholas Morrow would be the other starter at linebacker next to Nakobe Dean. But according to The Athletic and their beat writer who has been closely watching the team, Christian Ellis has actually emerged as a dark horse to potentially take that LB2 role in Philly. Ellis was an undrafted free agent out of Idaho back in 2021. He's played a total of like 40 defensive snaps for the Eagles since entering the league. So really nothing to add analysis wise other than to say that this is someone to kind of keep an eye on in deeper leagues that you can add at the end of drafts or off the waiver wire right now for nothing. Especially on Sleeper, he has that DL LB dual designation. So if he does win the starting role, you could pop him in the DL slot and get near full-time linebacker production, which is an added bonus.
Oh, from your lips to my draft board, I'd love for that scenario to come through. So when we were talking about Caden Ellis, one of the things that I kind of was checking out, trying to figure out what happened last year, how well he played. You can clearly see he's played for 3 years. His PFF grade has risen noticeably all 3 years, right? There's a clear sign of ascension that gives you optimism that he might end up being a really good player. If you look at Nicholas Morrow, what you just see is he's been in the league for 5 years and he has been nothing but league average. And listen, being a league average linebacker is we're talking about a very small percentage of human beings. That's a great feat by itself, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to play that many snaps. Now, he knows this defense, so that was my thought. I think that's probably might have been in your thinking as well. Like, he's going to know this defense, and he's going to be somebody that they can rely on a little bit for that. But what it really does for me is it makes me all the more confident that they really are handing the keys of this defense to Nakobe Dean, which is, he barely played last year because of the talent on the team, but they're going to give him the keys of this defense, which is awesome. So, similar to Buffalo, I'm not drafting any of these linebacker twos until we see. But man, if Christian Ellis gets it and I can use him as a defensive lineman, that'll be great.
Yeah, that's a nice cheat code with a platform like Sleeper for sure.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely, it's wheels up for Nakobe Dean, because that's really positive news for him, and that they have the trust in him. I know he's getting the green dot and all of that as well. So, all right, last one here. I will move away from the linebackers and I will talk about the Steelers safety too. So, this one, kind of interesting. We know Minkah Fitzpatrick is locked into an every down role, which will very likely be that deep free safety spot that we've always seen him play. But with Terrell Edmunds departing to the other Pennsylvania team, there is an open competition for that strong safety role that Edmunds previously occupied. So right now, it's apparently between DeMonte Kyzir and Keanu Neal for the job. And as we know, Neal, ever since he left Atlanta, he went back and forth a little bit between playing linebacker and safety, which honestly, I think probably helps his case a little bit for this job, given the Steelers' tendencies to play more dime personnel, rotate a safety down into that linebacker role. I also think it helps him that he's a bit more experienced as an NFL starter. He has that former first-round draft capital to his name as well. He's younger, has better size to hold up in the box too. Although, because KZ has the experience, at least in this defense specifically, played close to 300 defensive snaps there last season, which helped him earn his best PFF grade of his career so far at 81.0. So really can go either way. I think Neal offers the higher upside of the two. So he's the one I'm more willing to take a late round flyer on right now. But either way, this could be a lucrative IDP role for either guy that'll spend probably more than half of their snaps closer to the line of scrimmage. Edmunds, did that, but he just wasn't efficient with his opportunities, which is why people might not necessarily realize that it was actually a nice spot for an IDP safety.
Yeah, this one is interesting. Casey, I think, also played the majority of his snaps deep. So when you look at these safeties, what you see is one of them has significant box experience, and that's Keanu Neal. And that doesn't mean that they're, Fitzpatrick can play anywhere, right? So they may elect to use KZ as more of a primary deep safety and move Fitzpatrick around the field a lot. When you have somebody as talented as him, you can put him in all sorts of different places, right? But again, as we had talked about earlier, trying to just put yourself in the defensive coordinator's shoes for a second and looking at all of your pieces, what you see here is that there's Cole Holcomb, who I think is a solid, interior linebacker. Then you've got a Landon Roberts, who's just, again, like Morrow, he's kind of league average, right? So you don't really have a great LB2 there. So there's if that's a little bit of a weakness, then how are you going to fill that? To me, that leans more toward Keanu Neal for all the reasons you just said, Jon. He's got he's straight up played linebacker. He understands the role of a linebacker. He's obviously has played plenty of safety. He's bounced back and forth. So he is a movable chess piece. If you one of the keys to some of these defenses, some of these defensive tendencies is putting people out there, and this will go to Belichick's position listing, right? If you put out, if you're a quarterback and you look up and you see a defensive alignment, and you don't really know if the player you're staring at is going to actually function as a linebacker or if he's going to drop deep or whatever. Any of those questions, that really helps your defense a lot,
Yeah.
right? So Keanu Neal is what is to me, Keanu Neal and Fitzpatrick are the ones you can move around the most. They can help you with your coverage linebacker issues. They can cover deep. This could also be another situation where we see all three of them on the field. I'm with you. I'm not going to take KZ or Neal as my DB1, and I'm not going to take them as my DB2 as well. But if I'm going to take a shot at one of these, it's going to have to be Neal, because if he works in the role that, Jon, that you and I have talked about, he has the potential to, he could be a top 20 defensive back for us this year.
Yeah.
If he misses, he misses. He's my DB3. I can go to the waiver wire and pick somebody up.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing, right? Especially at safety, when you're looking at some of these guys, these values, these sleepers, whatever you want to call them, they really don't cost much, right, to take a shot on. But they're guys that could emerge and could be significant values if they break out in the way that we think they could. But if they don't, we move on to the next guy. There's always a waiver wire option waiting to take their place. So, yeah, very exciting times. We'll see how it all plays out here throughout training camp into the preseason. But that is going to do it for another episode of the Big Nickel IDP podcast. I hope everyone is feeling a little better about finding some value in IDP drafts after this one. I mean, how can you not, after listening to the great Justin Varnes wax lyrical on some really great options for 2023? Justin, I really appreciate you coming on here again this year to talk IDP with me. It is always a pleasure. I greatly appreciate it.
Man, I love coming on your podcast. Let's do it some more during the season, and put me down to come back next year. Let's do it again. Always a pleasure to talk ball with you.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. Yes, we will definitely do it again. And please let the good people know where they can find you and your work as well.
You can find me on Twitter at DownwithIDP. I'm one of the fantasy analysts over at fantasypoints.com. I'm delivering all the IDP news over there. So find me on Twitter or on Fantasy Points, and then you'll see me up and down Jon's timeline as well from time to time.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely check out Justin and his work. As for me, all of my written content can be found on pff.com. We have a ton of fantasy content hitting the website every day, and that includes plenty of IDP articles to keep my fellow defensive football friends busy. So please be sure to check all of that out. You could also find me on the PFF Fantasy Podcast every week, now twice a week. Hell, it might even be more than twice a week now, talking offensive fantasy football for those that are interested in such a thing. But we will be back in a couple of weeks with the Green Dot King, Mr. Mike Woolert, talking through the 3-down linebacker situations across the NFL. That's going to be a big one. So hopefully you'll all tune in for that as well. I appreciate you all listening as always. And until next time, IDP out.